Okay, this lesson today is on summarizing deviations from the mean. So, now let's look at exercise 1 to 4. It says, a consumer's organization is planning a study of various brands of batteries that are available. So as part of its planning, it measures lifetime. For example, how long the battery can be used before it must be replaced again. For each of the 6 batteries of brand A and 8 batteries of brand B, dot plots showing the battery lives for each brand are shown below. So they have the dot plot above for A and the one below for B. So these are battery life, and the battery lives are in hours. So they give us our unit right there. It says, does one brand of battery tend to last longer, or are they roughly the same? And what calculations can you do in order to compare the batteries' lives of the two brands? So if we look at this, if we look at A and B here, there doesn't seem one that's really great and a bunch of data that's very low. So they seem to kind of follow a trend. So there's 2, 2, and then the rest. So it kind of seems to be scattered throughout from 75 to 120. And the same thing with A. So we can say that the dot plots, the dot plots show that brand A and brand B are about the same. Okay. It says, so if they're about the same, what calculations can you do in order to compare battery lives of the two brands? We would want to calculate the means. So I'm going to calculate both means now, because they're about both the same, so the mean would be a good option to use. So if we look at this, we want to calculate the mean. Let's start with brand A. If we're talking about brand A, we want to go through and come up with what these data values could be. I'm going to say that this, since it's between 80 and 85, I'll say that's about 83. This one is a little bit below 95, so it'll be, I'll say 94. This one's a little bit above, so this will be 96. This one's a little bit above 105, so I'll say 106. This one is about 113. This one was right below it, so it'll be 114. So on. So if I wanted to come up with brand A, I would add up these numbers. 84, 94, 96, 106, 113, 114. So I'm going to add them together. So I would get 83 plus 94 plus 96 plus 106 plus 113 plus 114, and I'm going to divide by the number that we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers. If I added those all together, I would add 83 plus 94 plus 96 plus 106 plus 113 plus 114 to get 606 divided by 6, which would be about 101. Okay? Now let's do brand B. If we had brand B, now let's go into the dot plot for brand B and decide what these values could be. This one's a little bit less than 75, but not right next to it. So I'm going to say that's about 72. A little bit after it would be about 76. A little bit after 90 would be 92. A little bit before 95 would be 94. 110 would be right here. So in between 115 and 120, I'm going to say this is 117 and this is 118. And then this would be about 124. So now what I'm going to do is find the mean of brand B. If I'm finding the mean of brand B, I would want to add those numbers together. So I'm going to add 72 plus 76 plus 92 plus 94 plus 110 plus 117 plus 118 plus 124, all divided by the total number that we have. So we have probably 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'll divide it by 8. And if I do that, I will get approximately or equal to 100.375. We can see that they're very close to each other, the means. So it would be 100.375 if you would add those together and divide. Okay? So now the next question is asking us, once we find the means, they want to know, do the battery lives tend to differ more for batteries to battery for brand A to brand B? And if we look at this, if we're trying to figure out which lives tend to differ, so basically the difference, or we're trying to find the range of the data. So let's figure out. So for brand A, brand A seems to range from 83 to 114. So I'm going to do 114 minus 83 to equal 31. For brand B, it ranges from 72 to about 124. So for brand B, I'm going to have 124 minus 72 to equal 52. So now if we look at this, the variability in battery life is greater for brand B than for brand A, because it's greater. Brand B is 52, brand A is 31. So we could say the dot plot shows the variability in battery life is greater for brand B than brand A. Okay, so the dot plot shows the variability in battery life is greater for brand B than it is for brand A. And then it says, would you prefer a battery brand that has battery lives that do not vary much from battery to battery? Why or why not? Well, if we think about this, we don't want the battery lives, some of them to be really low and some of them to be really high. So we would want to prefer a battery life that has less variability, because that would mean that we would know exactly what to expect for our battery life. So it says, which would you prefer? A battery brand that has battery lives that do not vary much from battery to battery? We prefer a brand with small variability. In lifespan. And we do that because these batteries will be more consistent and they'll be more predictable. You'll be able to predict about how much battery life you'll have. So we'll say that. So because these batteries will be more consistent and predictable. Okay? So now we're going to start talking about deviations from the mean. So we want to figure out how, so it says, the table below shows lives and hours of the brand A batteries. So 83, 94, 96, 106, 113, and 114. And we're talking about brand A. So first we have to look at what is the mean for brand A. The mean for brand A, we said, was 101. Okay? So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to take the mean and we're going to subtract away. So we want to say deviation from the mean, or how much off are we from the mean. So if we go from 101 to 83, we're going to do 101 minus 83, and that will equal 18. So deviations from the mean is going to be a minus 18. So if we take 101 and subtract 18, we'll get 83. Okay, let's go on to the next one. We have 94. So since 94 is less than 101, we're going to do 101 minus 94, and that's going to equal 7. So it will be minus 7. So if we take 101, subtract 7, we'll get 94. Now for 96, 96 is again less than 101. So we're going to do 101 minus 96, and we'll get 5. So it will be a negative 5. And then again, if we have 106 and 101, 106 is greater, so we're going to have 106 minus 101. 106 minus 101 is again going to be 5, but in this case it's going to be positive 5. Because if we take 101 and add 5 to it, we'll get 106. Now if we look at this, 101 and 113, since 113 is greater than 101, I'm going to do 113 minus 101, and then I will get 12. So this will be again positive 12. And now for the last one, 114 and 101, since 114 is bigger than 101, I'm going to do 114 minus 101, and that will equal 13. So it'll be plus 13. Okay, so they wanted us to calculate the deviations from the mean for the remaining values and write your answers in the appropriate places in the table. So we did that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let's look at the next page. So now let's look at exercise 5 to 10. So if we're looking at this, it says the lives of 5 batteries of a third brand. So we have brand C. It says we're determined. The dot plots below show the lives of brand A and brand C batteries. They want to know which brand has a greater mean battery life. Well, we have brand A. We know that brand A is obviously 101 for our mean. Okay. So let's figure out. It says you should be able to answer these questions without doing any calculations. So if we look at this, we know that brand A was already 101. So brand A, the mean would be about here. So this would be about the mean. But if we look at this, if we look at brand C, right? So we go from here to here. We know that it's pretty even on both sides. So the mean for brand C would be about here, somewhere in here, right? So somewhere over here would be the mean for brand C. So which one has a greater mean? We know it's brand C. We'll have, no matter what that value is, we know it's going to be greater than the mean for brand A. So brand C will have a greater mean battery life. And now they want to talk about variability. They want to know which brand shows greater variability. So remember, variability is basically like a range. So let's look at how brand A varies. So for brand A, okay, we said brand A goes from 114 to 82. So we're going to say 114 minus 82, that's equal to 32. And now we know brand C, if we look at this data value right here, that will be about 97. Okay, and this value over here is right below 120, but not right next to it, so it's going to be about 118, I'd say. So now let's look at brand C. So for brand C, we will have 118 is the highest minus the lowest of 97 is equal to 21. So we'll know that brand A has a higher variability or greater variability. So we'll say brand A has a greater variability. Okay. So now for 7, they want to know which brand would you expect to have a greater deviation from the mean? And it says ignoring the signs of the deviation. So we know that since brand A has a greater variability, it means it should have a greater deviation from the mean, because the mean is going to be somewhere in there. So which brand would you expect to have a greater deviation from the mean? We could say since brand A has greater variability, that means it should have greater deviation from the mean. It says the table below shows the life for brand C batteries. So we have 115, 119, 112, 98, and 106. So they want us to first calculate the mean battery life for brand C. And it says be sure to include units in your answer. So they give us this table. They want us to calculate the mean battery life for brand C. Well, let's go up and figure out what our values are for brand C. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So if we look at this, we have 97. A little bit past 105 will be 106. A little bit in the middle of 105 and 115 will be 113. And then we'll have 115, and then we have 118. So if we were trying to find the mean now of these values, so let's try to find the mean. So if we're trying to find the mean here, okay, we're going to add them together. We have 97 plus 106 plus 113 plus 115 plus 118, and then we're going to divide by the number that we have. We know that there's 5 because they tell us right here, 5 batteries. So we're dividing by 5. So we get about 109.8, which we're going to say is that's about 110 hours. So we're going to use the mean to be approximately equal to 110 hours. So if we look at this, we're going to take 115 and subtract 110. 115 minus 110 is a positive 5. So it'll be positive 5. Because if we take our mean, add 5 to it, we'll get our life. 119 minus 110 is going to be 9, and it's going to be positive 9. Because if we add 9 to 110, we'll get 119. So we always start with our mean. Now we have 112 minus 110 is going to be 2. So if we add 2 to this, we'll get 112. So we're going to be adding 2. And if we have 110 minus 98 is going to be 12. And it's going to be minus 12, because if we subtract 12 from this, we'll get 98. So we're subtracting 12. And then we have 110 minus 106 is going to be 4, but it's going to be minus 4, because if you subtract 4 from this, 110, you'll get 106. So we just did number 9. It says write the deviations from the mean and the empty cells for the table in brand C. So we just did that. Okay? So now let's go on to our next question. It says, ignoring the signs, okay, are the deviations from the mean generally larger for brand A or brand C? And does your answer agree with your answer to exercise 7? So if we go back and we look at this, okay, let's look at our variability. So here, we're ignoring the signs. Here's for brand A. We have 18, 7, 5, 5, 12, and 13. Okay? So now let's go look at the table for C that we had. For C we had 5, 9, 2, 12, and 4. So brand C seems to be less than brand A. So what we can say, so now we're back to our question for 10. It says, ignoring the signs, are the deviations from the mean generally larger for brand A or for brand C? We know that it's larger for brand C, or brand A rather. So if we look at this, the deviations from the mean are generally larger for brand A than for brand C. And they want to know, does your answer agree with exercise 7? Well, in exercise 7, if we go back, it says, which brand would you expect to have greater deviation? We said brand A has greater variability, so it should have greater deviation. And that's exactly what we said here. The deviation for the mean are generally larger for brand A than for brand C. So we could say, it does agree with our answer in exercise 7. So it will work. Okay, so now let's move on to exercise 11. Exercise 11 to 15 says the lives of 100 batteries of brand D and 100 batteries of brand E were determined. You say the results are summarized in the histograms below. So if we look at this, the first thing that I noticed that I circled here are at the beginning of the graph, this little squiggly line. The squiggly line means that we're not starting at 0. Okay? It's a jump in the graph. So we're basically, once we do a jump in the graph, we start at 85, and now we start at 85 and we're going up by 10s here. Okay? So that's all that means in both of these histograms here. You start at 85 and then you jump. So we're jumping to 85 and then we're going up by the same amount. So let's look at this. So now if I turn the paper over, so I'm going to keep this brand D up here. The first question, which is on the back of this page for you guys, I just want to keep the histogram up here. So now for number 11, they want us to estimate the mean battery life for brand D, and it says do not do any calculations. So if we look at this, if we look at our graph, it's generally a curved, so it's a symmetrical deviation. For distribution, not deviation. Symmetrical distribution. So if we have a symmetrical distribution for this, basically the mean is going to be right in the middle. So in this area right here. So in between 105 and 115 is where it's going to be. So we can say that the mean battery life for brand D is about, because we don't know without any calculations, what's between 105 and 115? Well, probably about 110. So we can say 110. Okay? The next question, 12. They say they want us to estimate the mean battery life of brand E. So if we're looking at brand E now, right here. Okay? So they want us to estimate the mean battery life for brand E, and they want us to not do any calculations. So again, if we look at this, this is kind of a mound shape, so it's almost symmetrical. So basically, we're going to go in the middle again. So here, for brand D, it would be in between 125 and 130. So we can say the mean, put my little asterisk, the mean battery life for brand E is about, and if we look here, it would be 125 to 135, so it would be about 130. and it would be 130 hours. Just like for the last one, for number 11, we would say about 110 hours. Okay? So now, they want to look at this. So let's look at the next question for 13. They want to know which of brand D and brand E show a greater variability in the battery lives. And do you think the two brands are roughly the same in this regard? So if we look at this, so we have brand E. Let's just start with brand D. So brand D, if we look at this brand D, it varies from 85 to about 145. So I'm going to do 145 minus 85. If we do 145 minus 85, we get about 60. Now for brand E, let's look at brand E really quick. Brand E varies from 105 to about 165. So we're going to get 165 minus 105. And if we do 165 minus 105, that would be about 62. And if you look, they vary about the same amount. So we can say that brand D and brand E seems to vary about the same. And then for number 14, they want us to estimate the largest deviation from the mean for brand D. So if we wanted to estimate the largest variation from brand D, if we're looking at the chart, so if we look at this chart right here, we said our mean for brand D, so our mean would be about, we said, 110 hours. So if it varies about 110 hours here, we want to see that if we look at this, so the largest possible value that we would have would be 145 around. So somewhere around 145. So we can do 145 minus 110, because this would be the highest, and that's the farthest away from our mean. So we could do 145, so let's go back to this, for our estimate of largest deviation for brand D here. We would do about 145 minus 110, which is equal to about 35 hours. So we're going to say about 35 hours would be the greatest variability between the two. Okay? And then for the last question that we have here, they want to know, what would you consider a typical deviation from the mean for brand D? So basically, if we look at this, if we go back to brand D, for brand D, they say consider the typical deviation for the mean for brand D. If we have this brand, our mean is about here, we said, 110. So typically, it would be 5, 10, or 15 off, right? So 5, 10, or 15 off. Okay? So it would be somewhere between, so a typical deviation, so we could say a typical deviation from the mean would be about 5 to 15 hours.